Makes me want to see
Episode,
more.
what is this episode? Episode something. It's episode
29.
29. Is that
29.
possible? Episode 29
Wait,
of, what is it again? It's something. KTLO. That's it. It's episode 29 of KTLO, Keeping the Learning On. And here we are again. It's Friday. Right now it's Friday. When you watch this, it could be some other day, but today it's Friday, and here we are for episode 29. And it's just an amazing day, and we're going to see what we can do to kill that. No, we're going to make it even more amazing for you and for ourselves. We are here like the Who's in Whoville once again, and today's topic is the center of gravity, which I seem to be missing this morning, but that's another story entirely.
This is not the.
I want to know. I want to know if this is the Who's of Whovilles. Who's playing the Grinch in this episode?
Oh, Greg is always the Grinch.
Gregory, you're.
Patty wrote that script, didn't she?
Yeah, she did. So and look, there she is, Patty Blackstaff.
Hi, Patty.
Balancing fits in with the center of gravity theme. Balancing technology with humanity. Greg Sanker, senior IT leader, empowering excellence. Simone Jo Moore, unionizing IT and living in a VUCA world. There's that lovely Italian drink, Sambuca, I believe is called. No, that's a different thing entirely, isn't it?
Different country.
And then there's me down here in South Carolina. And that's who we are. And we also have with us two of our recurring characters, special guests. I'm not sure how to bill you folks, but here we are. We have Dee Burgoyne and Kathy Veldboom with us again today. Welcome.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure to have you on with us. And if this is the first time you've tuned in, we're sorry. No, we are very glad to have you. And we just have a discussion every week. We grab a topic and we talk about it. And that's what's going on here. So we're happy to have you aboard. And also for season 2, which started with episode 21, and we're on 29 now, 29. We decided to have an interviewer designated for each episode, and today it's Patty Blackstaff.
Yay.
Take it away, Patty.
So I get to be the Punisher today? Is that how that works?
I did not sign up for that.
Ouch!
Oh.
There's a wonderful opportunity for us on the center of gravity to take a look back at a couple of the things that we've already talked about. One of them was episode 11, where we talked about eyes on the horizon. I don't know where I'm going, but I know who I want to be there when I get there is something we've repeated episode after episode after episode. Socrates said, "To know thyself is the beginning of wisdom." And then in episode 22, we talked about our North Star and true north, and discussed a little bit about, are our truths still true? And right now, there's a lot going on in the world, and that's a really good question to ask ourselves. In times of chaos, we're all part of a really great system, and it's a greater system. We're connected and influenced by so many things. It's energy and information are coming from everywhere. That influence needs a little bit of regulation, I think, and with a little bit of intention. Ultimately, it's about flow and balance. But during chaotic and challenging times, we get a little lost. So I'm going to jump in and ask you, Roy, how important is our circle of advisors to help us find our footing when we get lost, like formal or informal, for maintaining balance?
Super important. But there are some conditions to that. They have to be trusted advisors. And by that, I mean, not only trusted with confidential stuff, but also they know us and have a good sense of what our center is. So if these people are people that we've known for a long period of time, so much the better. Or they know us in a particular context, they know us through our work, or through our family, like whatever it happens to be, if they know they can judge where our center is, they know pretty much when we're not being true to that. And that's where the trouble starts, when we start veering off course a little bit.
So your advisor needs to be willing to have a voice and not afraid to put you in check then.
Absolutely. That's the point. And I think I've quoted him before, my friend Ed, who is a Fortune 100 CEO and chairman, said that, you hire smart people and you listen to what they tell you. And that he very much depended on his advisors to give him the straight dope. And you have to be willing to hear it,
Yeah.
which is the other side of the equation, right? You have to be willing to ask. They have to be willing to tell you, and you have to be willing to hear it.
That's the biggest part, isn't it? The willing to hear it. I think when we're out of balance, there is this neurobiological effect that occurs that impacts us, that helps tell when we're too far. How do we know? Simone, how do we know when we're out of balance? Because you're really good with this.
Of being out of balance?
No.
I actually
We'll get back into balance.
Pinky wish, Greg. I just said exactly the same thing on mute. Out of balance or in balance?
You knew I was going to say that. Sorry, Patty. Go.
You help us understand though how we can tell when we've gone too far, right? When we find ourselves kind of out of balance with ourselves.
I like the fact that Roy was talking about having our advisors around us. They're pretty good at letting us know. One of my favorites to think about, our flow. What is that flow? Just look at Mel Brooks. Okay, in partnership with Sid Caesar's Laugh Factory. I mean, these guys, the way they work, a lot of people think it's so off the cuff, but they work so hard together and in a collaborative mode and in an energy that, how is it going to come off, whether it's on stage or it's on screen or, a live performance type stuff. But, the super creative groups, and we can apply this to business, in the innovators and the creators, the ones that are designing, whether it's business flows or technology, super creative groups, whether jazz ensembles, theater groups, things like that, comedy writing teams, they get into a flow. And understanding how they do that kind of helps us understand how we know when we're out of flow. So a key question facing groups is, okay, how can we find just the right amount of structure? Because you want to have a little bit of that jamming type session, which we've talked about previously. But you need enough structure, not too much structure where it's going to smother that creativity. So the neurochemistry that dives in here, it's about getting to that state within ourselves and within that group that allows us to access solutions we don't normally peg into. That normally it's part of our waking consciousness, how we connect the dots that we don't normally see. It's those things that 2 o'clock in the morning when you wake up and go, aha, I have the answer. Or while you're doing something relaxing, like, even just having the shower or, cooking a meal. With that, when we're in the flow, our voice of doubt is removed. So look at the opposite of that. If you think that you're not in the flow, then you're probably not, because you're doubting already. So we have this dorsolateral prefrontal cortex thing going on, that when we get into flow, that deactivates our self-monitoring. It gets rid of some of the inner critic stuff that goes on for us. It also, when we're in flow, our problem solving is almost automatic, like tying the shoelaces and breathing. So we act without the hesitation. We have, risk taking is less scary. We move at a faster pace. So if we're talking about speeding things up in business and being more agile, then we really need to tap into what I call the ebb and flow, because that's how the effective business teams are looking at stuff. How do we balance the tensions there? How well are we openly communicating, giving our feedback, trusting the genius that's actually within each of the people there that we haven't necessarily recognized yet, but set up an environment to allow that genius to come forth.
That's awesome. How would I feel then what would my physiology be doing if I was out of flow?
Well,
What would my cues be?
Listen to yourself talk. That's probably the first clue. It's that, I just don't feel quite right today. Whether you say it out aloud or inside your head, it's don't feel quite right today. You fidget a lot. You'll have a lot of distractions. You will have even if you're not willing to admit to it, you start avoiding. You might see someone walking down the corridor and go, I just don't have enough energy to deal with that, and turn the other way, because flow is very much about the physical chemical reaction that's happening within the body with the emotions, and therefore the physical behaviors that come as a result. So if I see something that's fearful for me, or I just don't feel I have enough of the energy to deal with right now, I'm going to find any which way to get away from that. You know, even if it's an excuse of, I'll be right there, I just have to go make a coffee, you know, and that type.
Yeah, it's interesting when we think about balance, how so much of it is tied to feelings then. Yeah.
Well, there's interesting reading I would love people to look at, and it's work that was done a very long time ago by Dr. Candace Pert. She was part of School of Medicine at Johns Hopkins and working in chemistry, and she is a neuroscientist and pharmacologist. Her and her team were one of the discoverers of the opiate receptor in the brain. You know, the stuff that makes us happy, the endorphins. So, you know, I think she has a book called Molecules of Emotion, that these emotions that we're having, those things that we feel when we're not in flow, not in balance, there is a physiology to it, that if people can understand the basics, will probably help them realize that, you know, they're not acting crazy, they're not, you know, being poor performers, that there's something happening for them that we just need to understand and work with.
But it's like a trigger. Yeah. I mean, you get triggered, right? So, Greg, I've heard you talk about the alignment of your integrity with what you think, feel, and do. You know, mapping the feelings to what integrity means for you as a person. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, on the heels of that incredibly depthy analysis, I think mine's a little simplistic. Here's the thing: what I've learned in life, what I've observed of life, particularly in corporate leadership, being through some large successes or real highs and really dark times. The model that I've built, and I apologize, I didn't put it out on our blog yet, but there's the dimensions of what I think, what I feel, what I say, and what I do. And when those are further and further apart, that's a strain on integrity. And so the closer we can move them together so that they are coaxial, is that a word? You know, when they overlap in the middle together, the closer together they are, that's when you're operating in a point of integrity. And so what I've learned is where there's a tremendous gap between any of those. If I think and feel in one way, but my words and my actions are different, that's a strain on my own personal integrity. When I feel instinctively that I should or shouldn't be doing a certain activity, but my job or my function requires me to do that, I've got to challenge that. Is that an acceptable dissonance between the two? And so the way I've kind of looked at it is, you know, it includes, you know, the feeling is a little rough for me because I don't deal so much in emotions, because my strong suite is I go look for data, I go look for facts to explain situations. But the fact of the matter is I feel it long before I know any data. And so I'm moving into that space. But that comes to play is if, like Simone, you said it so well, is like, pay attention to how you feel, because there's a reason why you feel that way. If the situation is making you feel odd, at least give yourself permission to say, why am I feeling that way? What's going on here?
Absolutely. The definition of flow, and if you look at things like the Flow Genome Project and look at the leadership coaching around flow, flow is defined as the peak performance state where we feel our best and perform at our best. So tap into what you're feeling, and then you'll understand whether you're actually sitting in your flow or not. You know, the being in the zone thing.
That lines up really closely with Dr. Deborah Pierce McCall's work on flow and peak performance as well. She works in neuroscience, and she has two sides. One says one end of the spectrum is chaos, and the other one is rigidity. Right, and you come into the middle for flow, and when you're close to chaos, that's the creative side away from flow. So the further you get away from flow, the closer you get to chaos, and that's how our minds work. And being in flow is balancing the structure around rigidity and the creativity around chaos that manages.
And it is a delicate balance because,
Mhm.
you know, the brain is constantly trying to keep our neurochemical systems in balance.
Yeah.
Too much of or too little will shift things some way. And I've said in a previous episode, you know, the neurons that fire together wire together. So, you know, that's part of the flow that we're looking for,
Right.
is to get into that state of, you know, there's still a cycle. So you can't live in that state. Otherwise, we can't
Right.
evolve and learn.
Yeah,
But understanding how we can get into it and use that while we're in it, that's the key.
Yeah, absolutely. And Greg, you talked about our personal integrity. When we feel integrity and all of these feelings and all of this balance piece, isn't there a difference between what you think or feel and some circumstantial appropriateness that you have to deal with?
Yeah. So Patty, you and I always go there. I love it. It's like, look, there is a practical factor here. Like, maybe it's just me, but I'm just going to say out loud. Have you ever been in a crowded place and just thought, I wonder what would do if I shouted fire? Now, anybody who's listening to this, do not do that. It's not a good idea. I've never done it. It's against the law. Don't do it. Is that enough of a disclaimer? But have you ever had those passing thoughts, but you don't do it? You don't do it, right? And so what you have, and that's a kind of an exaggerated example of in any given context, a work, a relationship, making a broadcast like this, there's an appropriateness over your behavior. So you govern your behavior, you self-regulate what's appropriate. And so when we get in a corporate context or in a work situation, like, we have to be mindful of, you know, what is the proper and expected behavior. And so it might be that, you know, I don't wear a suit at 7 o'clock in the morning on a normal basis, but I do it because it's appropriate. And it makes me comfortable, but I just don't. So we have to regulate our behaviors. And so it's not, well, I don't feel like doing that, so I'm not going to do that. Hey, boss, I don't feel like giving you that report, so I'll just do it whenever I do feel like it, right? There's something about having a human relationship or a working relationship that we choose to say, it's not all about how I think, feel, and say and do. It's not all about me. But when you have the systemic dissonance between, like, you find yourself consistently being not in agreement to how we do something or what our values are within the environment, that gives you an opportunity to say, what's wrong here?
I like that. Roy, I want to hear from you because you've been really quiet over in the corner over there, and I know you have thoughts on this topic.
While Greg was talking, I was remembering something that happened. Oh, it's a Roy story. Yes, it is. I was having a beer one afternoon at a lovely place that had an outdoor courtyard. It was a nice day. I was sitting there kind of off on the side having a beer, and I saw somebody I knew come in, and there were very few seats left, and she made her way over and said to, can I say? I said, yeah, come on. She was a reporter with one of the Gannett newspapers. And she looked at me and she said, you know what I feel like doing today? And I said, no, Morna, what would you like to do today? And she said, I feel like making a scene. And I said, okay. And she picked up her beer mug and slammed it down on the table, stood up and started screaming, beeswax! You're always talking about beeswax! And it had nothing to do with anything anybody was talking about, totally out of context. And the entire place stopped cold. And I just sat there and looked at her and I thought, wow, that was awesome. And then she just sat down, picked up her beer, and proceeded to drink. And I thought, that was so far out there that who knows where it came from, but she felt much better after doing it. It was just a cosmic venting moment. It was wonderful.
Okay, so the good news that I just learned live on broadcast is I'm not the only one. So okay, good. Thanks, Roy.
You
I
don't
almost
know.
felt like I was in a scene from Harry Met Sally just then.
I'm going to tie us back though, and then bring us back forward to that story a little bit. Great.
Yeah, did you say tie us back or tie us up?
There's a thought.
It's tie up, not gag up.
As soon as we can travel. Greg, you said something, and I want to acknowledge the importance of what you said. You said I've been involved in corporate leadership for quite a few years, and some of it really, really bright times, and some of it some pretty dark times. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that there are dark times in the workplace when we are with other people, and that it does drag us down. And sometimes we have a really strong sense of right versus wrong, right? We're pretty clear on those for ourselves. But Roy, are there any other ethical dilemmas that we might encounter?
Actually, if we look into ethical dilemmas a little bit, what we'll find is that the real tough ones aren't the right versus wrong. We tend to be able to figure that out, right? We have some kind of education in our background or some parental guidance for the most part that helps us decide right versus wrong. The tough ones are right versus right. When there's two horns of the dilemma that appear at least at first glance to be equally valuable. So Rush Kidder, with whom I had the privilege of working for a few years, and who founded the Institute for Global Ethics, divided them into 4 categories: individual versus community. Which one is right? Do I serve my individual needs or the community needs? Truth versus loyalty, which we run into all the time, and I'll come back to that one in a sec. Short term versus long term, which one is the better choice? Does this good that I provide now outweigh the good that's down the road? And justice versus mercy, which is also a really tough one that comes up fairly often. Do I administer, do I fire this person because of what they did? Or if I'm merciful to them, are we going to be better off? Are they going to learn from it and move on? Truth versus loyalty is a really tough one. And it comes up extremely often. It's okay, I find out that my friend stole $5,000 from an account that they had access to. And they're my friend. Do I turn them in? Am I loyal to them as a friend? What if somebody asks me about it? Do you know what happened to that $5,000? That's a really tough dilemma.
That's huge.
If I turn them in, it may ruin their career, may ruin their life, and they're my friends. So these are very tough choices that we have to make. And actually, that's the title of Rush's book, his first book on this topic. It's How Good People Make Tough Choices. So if you want to look more about the right versus right dilemmas, that's where to find them.
Yeah, I think too that, what we witnessed when we hear the stories, and the stories come out from different organizations of the slow road to hell, the little things that creep in, right? And the acceptance of that cognitive dissonance with who we really are and where we find ourselves one day because of small acts. Dee, you look like you have something you want to add there.
I'm thinking about a time when I, being in top leadership at an organization, sometimes, especially working in human resources, things that sometimes can rub against my own ethical beliefs. And I had a situation where a CEO that I worked directly for did something outside of work, which benefited her financially, but it involved work. And it actually came to the attention of the compliance committee, which I happened to be the person who took those calls. And then it ultimately went to the board of directors, and they reviewed the case for several months and ended up splitting 50-50 whether they would keep her. And all during that time, it ate at me and ate at me and ate at me, like you're saying, Patty. And it wasn't a slow drip. It was something that hit me all in one day. And I almost physically got ill when I got that call, because I knew right away that it was true, because I knew her. And I remember asking the director of the board, or the chairman of the board, came in my office one day and he said, "How are you doing with all this?" And I said, "Well, how are we going to feel? How would you feel if this story was plastered on the front page of our local paper?"
That is such a good answer.
And I thought, because I really thought what she did was very, very wrong. And he took a long pause, and what he said to me was, "I don't think that will ever happen," which for me was not the right answer. And ultimately, I went in and had a meeting with her that was witnessed by someone else. And I told her that I had totally lost faith in her, which obviously is a career-ending sentence. And I left, but it was such a long, drawn-out leaving and a long, drawn-out process. And what I did was, I wasn't in the flow. I was going with the flow, which I was just eating the party line. And in that field, you basically are a mouthpiece for the organization, and people, in my opinion, look to you for how things are going and what's being done, what's right.
Yeah, they measure right and wrong by your responses.
By my response. And yeah. I can say that the lesson I learned is that the longer you stay in that position where you're very physically ill, you get more and more ill. And the longer you stay, the longer it takes to recover from it.
I would agree. Thank you for that story. My gosh.
Great.
I think there are times when a lot of people find themselves in similar types of stories at work, maybe not necessarily as deep and damaging as that one, and the potential for that is massive. I think, we accept things when we're in organizations. We start small. We go, "Oh, I'm just going to ignore that. Well, now I'm just going to ignore that." And now, and then all of a sudden it creeps up to you, and you find yourself being asked to do something that other people are going to have to ignore. And Simone, earlier this week, you used the word chameleon. And as a person inside, you have all kinds of ways that you feel like you want to belong, to contribute, to be a part of something. Can you share a little bit about being a chameleon, and does that prove problematic ever when you're trying to remain grounded or centered in difficult times or through dissonance?
Yeah, I think it does. It was such an interesting conversation we had earlier this week about what does the chameleon effect mean, or what is being a chameleon like, how people interpret what that is about. For me, it was actually a saving grace being able to do that. Although the problematic side of it, if I can start with that, actually pegs off what Dee said. Having been involved in mergers and acquisitions, as I like to call them, and those sorts of things that go on where little by little you just feel like things are eating away at you, and things aren't quite fitting. It is far easier to kill an organization, believe me, than it is to actually save one from out of the depths of where it might be. And but it has to come to a point sometimes where you might feel like you are just sort of going with the flow because it's the easy thing to do. That's the trap, because that's the easy thing to do, where what you want to actually really do is change the flow of a river, not just a stream sometimes. And that's where you can find yourself in trouble. I think being flexible is a good thing. Being adaptable is something else. It's beyond flexibility. How relationships that we have with those things and the brain and how that interacts with the brain actually shapes who we are. And I think coming on from what Roy said earlier about right versus right as well, there's a core aspect of our mind that's really embodied in that relational process that regulates that flow of energy and information. And that's exactly what a chameleon does. It actually looks at the energy around it and the information around it, and it adjusts itself to that context or that environment, right? That's exactly what a chameleon does. So let me be clear how I view a chameleon, because there's a safety aspect, there's a changing aspect, and an ability that is very useful. So as a social chameleon, for example, and a lot of this is where people get introverts and extroverts completely mixed up sometimes. An introvert is often a chameleon, because it's a safety factor. It's an ability that you learn to be able to change colors, to blend seamlessly into a social environment. So it's not rocking the boat. We're still processing stuff, still trying to think about things. And it's only when we want to actually turn into one of those fire lizards, you know, that you might have seen in Australia, where we finally get to a point where we need to say something, you know, does all of that bubble to the surface. But, you know, you can be the life and soul of the party and also all be quiet and reserved. And the good thing about being a chameleon, I guess that characteristic, is paying close attention to the social cues that are going on around you. So you know whether you want to mimic what's happening at the moment, but we also know how to move away from or around. And sometimes the trick to being a chameleon, and trick is not the right word I want to use, I should say like the learned ability to move around that tricky bit or the tricky conversation that's happening. Sometimes you're able to bypass, I guess, that challenge and shift the river onto another path by maneuvering, because a chameleon also maneuvers, and people think, you know, forget about that. It symbolizes, you know, if you want to look at the sensitivity, when you think about the behaviors, that it encourages you to have patience, it encourages you to gain insight, always be curious, and to be resourceful. Those are the key characteristics about being a chameleon. But be careful that you're not using it just to hide, that you're actually using these characteristics as part of, we want to be socially included, but it's also a very good thing in order to reinvent ourselves. That's why we sometimes change roles and change careers, move from being frontline to becoming leaders. There's an evolution that happens as part of being a chameleon.
Greg, I'm going to ask you a quick question about, you know, bouncing off. You said one of the dark sides. Be careful, you said, about the chameleon, because you don't want to do it because you are hiding. But you know, Jim Rohn said we are the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with. And Greg, is there a dark side, I guess, to that, to the chameleon side in leadership?
So I was part of the conversation where Simone was talking about the chameleon, and in that conversation, I chose to suspend my preconceived notion of what a chameleon is to understand what she's describing. And what she describes is a very adaptive, self-aware individual or personality. I will have to say, I grew up in a culture where chameleon was viewed universally as a negative thing. It's somebody who becomes everything to everyone for the purpose of getting ahead, and you never really know who they are, and they may not even know who they are at their core. But what Simone describes it as is somebody who has very strong core values and is self-aware enough to be adaptive to be successful in various circumstances. And I like that a lot. But where somebody becomes very adept at becoming what they need to be in all circumstances, I think the danger there is that you're creating a gap between who you truly are and who you're being for the purpose of success in this situation. So I think that's the dark side, is you get lost, or you quote unquote start buying your own con, where you kind of get confused about who you are at the very core. And I think that's the danger. But I want to go back and emphasize, I'm not undermining what Simone said. I think it's really, really important.
Buy your own con. I like that. I've written that down, because buying your own con is, I've witnessed that many times, and each of us have probably been in a situation where we've tried to belong and fit,
So
and ended up finding ourselves there.
if I could have just a minute on this topic, is, we all are exposed to various personalities on social media and whatnot. And one of the things that I've really found interesting is some people present very, very authentic, but if you pull them aside, they're not. That authenticity is part of their public persona, and they're really not that. Other folks who have the similar kind of persona, if you interact with them, you find out it's like, that's really you. You're just you being you. What's the difference? I don't know, but I think it ties to being integrous. My nephew, who was an aspiring young actor before he passed away way too soon, met Robin Williams at a conference, and he intentionally was the last person of the line, and he brought in a VHS tape, and I apologize, I wasn't planning on telling the story, and Robin asked him why this one, and he said because, and he explained something, and Robin Williams was completely blown away, and the two of them had this private conversation for a very long time, because Robin was authentic. And they connected not at the, hey, glad, thanks for coming, here's your autograph, and off you go. That's a persona. But when they go out off script and just really connected at an authentic level. And I think that, to me, is at the core of everything that we do, that when your integrity lines up, then you can be what you need to be in a circumstance.
Yeah, I think I think centering yourself in that authenticity is really important. I know Simone speaks to that a lot. Kathy, can't that get you into troubled circumstances sometimes?
It can. I was thinking a lot about the chameleon, and I have to confess that I was a chameleon early in my career. I think it came out of people pleaser and wanting to be, one of the, company cheerleaders, always on board with everything. And that completely led me off my center of gravity, my harmony. And it also tore me away from my morals and values and things that are important to me. And that's when you start, Dee mentioned the stomach aches. That's when I started experiencing the stomach aches, when you are asked, because you put yourself in a position, you are asked to do something that goes against what some of your, you pick your top 2 personal values or your top 4, and it can absolutely lead you into trouble. It can also, I'm thinking of another situation where, what is the right thing to do? Yeah. And sometimes the right thing to do may not align with your core values. It may be really difficult and much easier to go with the flow. But when you know what the right thing to do is to be able to do that and feel comfortable and backtrack back into your world of harmony. You have to go out, and then you have to allow yourself to come back into that state of harmony.
That is so amazing. That vulnerability is really tight. So what you described just now is how Brene Brown really talks about the courage that is behind, you wake up one day and you take a look in the mirror and you say, oh, you got Dare to Lead. I love that book.
I made every one of my managers read it.
That kind of courage to be able to say, I've traveled this far down this path, and I woke up one day and I don't know who the heck I am. And then you have to take a stand, because suddenly you've rejigged your moral compass, right? Roy, but you talk about something a little bit different than the moral compass. You talk about maybe a moral GPS. Can you expand on that? Because I've heard you discuss that before.
Well, the moral compass tells us one thing. It tells us one direction, right? A compass's idea is to point to true north. And we've talked about true north. We've talked about finding your true north and heading for your true north. And I rewatched the wonderful movie for which Daniel Day-Lewis won the Best Actor Oscar, Lincoln. And it's just an astounding movie, and he does an amazing job. But there's one conversation Lincoln is having with Thaddeus Stevens in the movie. And I'm not sure whether this is actually from Lincoln's life. I tend to doubt it. But he says, a compass I learned when I was surveying. It'll point your true north from where you're standing, but it's got no advice about the swamps and deserts and chasms that you encounter along the way. If in pursuit of your destination, you plunge ahead, heedless of obstacles, and achieve nothing more than sink in the swamp, then what's the use of knowing true north? So if you don't know what else is around you, true north might not be enough information. And that goes back to what I was talking about earlier with the advisors, because they can help you. They can help give you that sense of what is around you, and they can provide some of that context that you don't have from just looking in one direction.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow.
Dee?
I have a quick story, and this is I don't know if it's a metaphor or an analogy, but I have a large lawn on my front yard, and I have a riding lawnmower, and I have these long strips that I need to mow. And I'm really like everything to be perfect. So I learned that if I follow the track of the previous line and I look back, it goes like this. But if I pick a spot on the horizon, and this is the same with horseback riding, you pick a spot where you want to go and you keep your eye on that spot and just mow and don't look at the very next thing in front of you and the very next thing in front of you. It's a perfect line. I can't understand it, but I think that's how the true north is that it's a beacon and it doesn't move and it stays there. But you have to be intentional about choosing it and getting it in your sights and not disregarding all of the clutter and the distractions along the way.
Yep, that absolutely. I'm having an emotional reaction to your story, because that is something that for the last couple of years I've been doing a bit of a personal reset, and I see that when I am not doing that, when I am not looking at the beacon, I am I'm doing something that Simone talked about with flow. So I'm paddling and trying to change the river instead of looking at where I need to go and managing the river, right? Thank you for that story, because that is such a good way to describe true north. Such a good way.
So Patty, I have to break in here. And so you're saying that my 30-year history of trying to change the direction of rivers is probably a fool's errand. Is that what you're saying?
Well, if you want to be in the flow, you might want to.
I'm just being vulnerable, like everybody else here on this call. It's like this is a magic moment happening here, but it's like
I've loved the way Greg, where you've actually blown up portions to actually, change the flow with that river and say, we're going there.
I do that. And sometimes you're successful, but so I don't know, Patty, I don't know if we want to be completely transparent, but I've had a few tough conversations with Patty where essentially, and I won't put words in her mouth, but she'll ask me, is it more important to be, what is the saying? Anyway, do you want to be right? Change the river, or do you want to be successful and make progress or make a meaningful contribution? And my heart always says, I want to make a meaningful contribution. And if I can move the needle in some direction, that's what I want to do. Then stop changing the flow of the river. I'm not putting words in Patty's mouth. She never said that, but I did to myself.
Dee, I've got an experiment for you off the lawn mowing story, because we've got, a couple of large fields here, and hubby's got the ride-on mower too. And I have to say, it's amazing because you're right, the straight line, you've got to have that eye on the horizon to get that, because otherwise you're just going over the mole bits and around and you end up with the little waves and screw bits. But you can be intentional to change that pattern. Because we have such a large field, and occasionally we get the French military air flying over for their training patterns and stuff like that, he intentionally creates these different images and patterns in the field with the mower. So you've got to know the pattern you're going to create, and he does the levels and creates the pattern. And he's had waves, and he's had this and all sorts of things. So there's something you can play with.
I love that. That's Shane flying his freak flag.
Absolutely. It's brilliant.
You know, we're in organizations, and you talked about chameleons and fitting in, and then we talk about flying your freak flag. So bringing who you are to that, who you are, that gives you the that puts a flavor onto the, you know, boiled chicken that is the organization you might be sitting in.
Boiled chicken? Could we not come up with, like, I don't know, coq au vin or something else?
But something plain, right? There is something plain going on, and it doesn't match your personality, but you bring your personality to it, right? And while you're following that beacon, you have this responsibility, though, as a player in that game. Kathy, can you tell me a little bit about the beacon and how maybe your responsibilities need to be considered outside of just you chasing that?
Exactly. And setting that beacon is one factor that, as we said, you have to look at the context and everything that's going on. And if that is really maybe the beacon of your department, what direction are you going to serve your customers, to help the company, and you define it as maybe your department mission statement. It's then how do you use, appropriately use, and I'm going to use the term here, emotions that inspire, that, you know, lift their team up out of their ordinary status quo or center of gravity. Because if you're trying to lead your team to something and they're all comfortable in their own little, you know, different places, it is how to navigate the change you want to see and that you need to see from your team to get there.
I love that. You know, everything that is really highly successful, like really big sales, the psychology around how Las Vegas works, all of that are motivated by how it makes people feel. And that's why we are all, you know, focused in the industry we're in is about experience, right? How are they experiencing it? Because experience isn't about what I give, experience is about how they feel. And if you can translate that to the people that are working with you, but the navigation's hard, right? Like, so we can structure it, and we can say in an organization, hey, you know what, we've got this training, and this training says we're going to follow these ethics, and we're going to accept these behaviors, and I don't think necessarily that we know how to navigate through the reality compared to the training. So
Right.
when we're trying to follow that beacon and we're trying to balance that, you know, Greg, is it possible for people to continue working when their values don't match? And does it matter?
Oh, wow, that you got another hour?
Yeah.
So here's some hopefully directed thoughts on this, and we could go on quite a bit. But most organizations have some level of any size have some level of, hey, you know, here's our annual ethics or standards of business conduct or whatever you call it. That it's where the company or the organization communicates expectations around proper behavior, you know, lie, cheat, and steal, insider trading, you know, all that sort of stuff. And we all take the training, every one of us, because, you know, your employment is kind of contingent upon you agreeing to those things. And yet in organizations, we find a whole lot of deviation from those. I mean, like who's the Uber CEO, this Travis somebody, Kalanick, who clearly was out of alignment with at least documented, you know, ethical or you know, behavioral expectations in the workplace, but he was caught outside of the workplace. And thanks to kind of this social media sort of thing, it became untenable for that organization. College professors, private employees who step out of the line, people will now go to their employer and say, hey, we don't like the way your employee was behaving, and things happen. So we're into a brand new space. So just taking the training and checking the box and saying, hey, I agree to do this is not enough. It's not enough. And that's where, Kathy, you want to toss in there? I see.
I do. So I'm going to just respectfully disagree with you, Greg, that I don't think we're in a new space, except the part about social media and all of the other factors that put a spotlight on things. I think the space has always been there. There's a guy, Peter Drucker, he did a lot on, leadership management. And he was the first one, they kind of call him the grandfather of bringing in relationships into work and the interplayings of people.
Yeah.
We're taking it a step further, I think, now as leaders and acknowledging what has already been there, which is emotions. And I do a lot of coaching and training, particularly coming back, from technical support, about customer experience, about emotions, because they don't tend to come from that type of background. They don't get that however that person's, morning went, they burned their tongue on their coffee, whatever, someone yelled at them in the hallway, and now something broke and they're calling you. It's finding that context in which to ebb and flow with how you need to communicate, what you need to emphasize to help them get through that situation if they're really stressed out. And sometimes they just need to listen.
Yep.
Everyone needs to listen.
It needs to be listened to. Absolutely. So where I was going with it's a new world order, and I'm not throwing back another argument, because I think you brought a really good point to the table. Where I was going with that is I think there's a new level of accountability, because corporate officers of a certain level have been able to get away with what would widely be viewed as poor behavior that never saw the light of day outside the organization. Watch an episode of Mad Men. The history is overloaded with episodic, systemic poor behavior that any organization, if asked, would say, no, we don't, that is not how we behave here. And yet it is how we behave here. It's, culture is the least common denominator of behaviors that's tolerated by its leadership. And so there's what you say, which I think is where Patty was going, is check the boxes and no, we will never do those things. And then there's what you do. And the dissonance between the two of those, for organizations and especially for individuals, I think that's where the tension lies.
In any of the work that we do with an organization, especially when we're focusing on culture, we talk about what we tolerate, we propagate. And when we are dealing with difficult situations through litigious avoidance, as opposed to corporate ethical understandings and huge risk. So the risk has increased, Kathy, significantly when you look at what now is visible, which never was, say, 10 years ago. And we as individuals within those organizations are still navigating. Life is like a river. Sometimes it gets wide and we're able to look at the sides and the trees and the view, and sometimes it gets narrow and we have to paddle like hell. And we have some ownership there and some accountabilities, right? We have a need to be able to manage and regulate and find our center within that. Roy, how might goals be directly related to that, finding and determining our center of gravity?
I think our goals really have a huge amount of effect on our center of gravity, right? And some people have an incredible ability to focus completely on the goal. This can go very badly, depending on what their goal is, or it might go well for them and badly for others, because a goal might be so focused and narrow that it doesn't take into account. Remember, going back to those dilemmas that I was talking about earlier, individual versus community. I'm going to get rich is a goal. Focused on that, laser focus on that has incredible consequences for how somebody behaves, has incredible contact effects on the people around them. And I'm going to get this done is another one. And I really, there's a very often quoted statement by Vince Lombardi, for whom I had immense respect. But he said, winning isn't everything, it's the only thing.
Mm-hmm.
Man, I have a problem with that statement. I have a big, big problem with that statement, because it just ignores so much other stuff that's going on, even in the sport of football. If you take it outside the sport, it gets bigger and bigger. But that's a topic for another day. But we have to be careful about that laser focus if we're not paying attention to the surroundings in which that goal exists.
Yeah, the goal itself, and tying back into what we tolerate, we propagate. What we tolerate is permission. We're giving permission to allow this to happen here. It's an expansion of dissonance systemically. So as the system moves from who they say they are to the tolerated behaviors within, right? And people aren't dumb. If you're working in that, you're feeling the emotion around that, right? There is a lot, Dee, you're in HR and have to deal with a lot of these kinds of things. How do you respond to that last bit?
In my years in human resources, I have seen, and we tend to operate so much by policies, procedures, protocols, strategies, all these things, but people really are emerging as, and what Kathy said, the relationships are turning into number one. And for years we've said people are messy.
Dee's frozen.
I think we lost.
It happened right on the word messy.
She was going to make such a great point too.
Boy, these people.
Oh, she's back. Okay, we finished with messy.
Okay. We heard people are messy.
People are messy, and people will say, for years I've heard people say, I can't get any work done. These people keep interrupting me. And I truly believe that we're on the cusp, out of necessity, of people realizing that it's human management, human leadership, human relationships, like Kathy said, that are going to drive success. And that's always driven success for the best leaders, is that they include everybody. They get the policies and procedures and protocols and all the other P's in place. And then they concentrate on the people and allow them to bring not just their best self, but their whole self. And that's the key to inclusion, is let them bring their whole self safely to work and contribute to the company so that everybody's winning. It's a win for everybody.
Love that.
Real quick, can I add one thing on that? Do you really hit on something when you were talking about the employees and, performance and metrics and things that management wants, and let's bring someone in that can get the right seats or right people in the seats. And I challenge that it is to understand the individual and what makes them tick, and understanding, emotions that they have, values that they have, things that really irk them, and factoring that in. And you have to individualize that human management That's how you're going to get. It's not to say that some people don't maybe need to go to a different position in the company or be exited, but we need to understand the humans we're working with. And it's tough to
Absolutely.
mix all that together.
Yeah, we've got
Soft
a
stuff, that's the hard stuff.
that is
Yeah.
that is the hard stuff. It's not the soft stuff in any way, form, or manner. And I think that, you know, we're sentient beings and we come with values and agendas and hopes and fears and dreams and all of those things that we walk into that building with, and they all compile and wrap around that goal or mission or purpose that we're trying to lead, where we add value and contribute to something bigger than ourselves, right? And if we're not paying attention to that, we're doing what we've talked about before, where performance equals attendance, or you know, cogs in a wheel, or whatever you want to call it. But we have knowledge organizations now. We don't have organizations where people, you know, the steno pool of 50 people in a room with typewriters in front of us, you know, following dictatorial kind of strengths, right? So I think there are some techniques that could be used, and Simone's really talked quite a few times in a lot of our calls about emotional intelligence. And what are some ways, Simone, that we could use emotional intelligence for defining our North Star, tapping into that energy and information, all those inputs, and still be able to maintain balance?
Well, that's a really good question, Patty, and actually ties back into thinking about also, you know, the chameleon uses the energy and the information to do what it needs to do. And I'd like to also sort of, I want people to think, as a leader, I'd like to ask this question of people who are listening to this. As a leader, are you actually the center of the gravity, you know, the orbit around which we can pull people to the direction we need them to be going? Or are you the black hole where they're just going to disappear into the unknown? And it's an incredibly fine line between going with the flow and only doing the things when it's effortless and easy, or just being plain and not flaky, you know. And I think one of the perfect demonstrations of this, and it is a visual demonstration, I am a very visual person. I do like to do my artwork. So there's a great short video by, and I know I'm going to get the pronunciation wrong, Arya Nierenberg. It's a very short video of the Earth, and because he's used the type of camera that he's actually used the Milky Way as the fixed point, and to show the rotation of the Earth over a period of time. So we have this idea, we're sitting on the Earth, we don't feel the rotation, and that happens with our leaders sometimes and our managers. We're just in this team, we don't feel what the rotation is going, we don't know what's going on, we don't see that fixed point all the time. And I think that's a really critical thing. If we could be the ones that felt the movement and the other thing was the fixed point, we would have a greater understanding of what our horizon is. We would have a greater understanding of what our movement and our journey is going to be. And so we can put the link in the notes, but it's a great little video. It's very short, but it gives a very visceral feeling, which is what emotional intelligence is about, a really visceral feeling of what that could be. And it's, to come back to what Greg was saying too, it's a stimulating aspect of our relationship and our leadership to experience the good and the bad behaviors, because it gives us that recognition of where we want that balance to be. You know, I like to move beyond the EI stuff and tap into the evolution of emotional agility, because this is where, when you have that full range of emotions and experiences, including the difficult ones, you know, with our curiosity, just like a chameleon will do, we will tap into that to choose to act in ways that are concordant with our values. And if we think of the North Star, and the North Star has been known as Polaris, what is our polarity? That is part of our balancing system. Our negative, positive, what is our polarity? That's what it's all about. And I think we, as humans, and the North Star is part of a triple star system. I think as humans, we're also a triple star system. We have mind, body, and spirit. And that taps back into what Dee was saying. Our whole self has to come and be at work. So imagine where you want to go or who you want to be, because that's like the North Star. It stands as a fixed point. It's a great, mind you though, it does have minor adjustments along the way. There is no true fixed point, but it gives us almost a fixed point from which we can take those measures. And your organization, their mission, their vision, or what it is that you're trying to be or who you're trying to become, that is your North Star. And we use our emotions as our values are our compass that guide us to that point. So ultimately, it's not what you get, but who you become. It's not being defined by your past or your work in progress. And this is where the chameleon comes back in again. We reinvent ourselves. We show our colors in different ways. We adapt. And that's part of who we are. And so make your emotions part of your business as usual. I think that's a really critical. You want something practical? Make your emotions practical. They are anyway. They're an inherent part of our decision making, unconscious, subconscious, and conscious.
I love that. I love that. And that ties into a word that Kathy used earlier, harmony. And when we're in harmony, we're in center. And if we can think of the word harmony for us and for our teams, then we are centering, right? We've gone over, and I do want to wrap up fairly soon, but what a great conversation. I don't know where I'm going, but I know who I want to be when I get there. That's intentionality. So living in the flow means somewhere in the middle between chaos and rigidity. And there are going to be a lot of inputs that are influencing that, and how we deal with that and how we regulate that and how we manage it is up to us. We own that. And that's through our vulnerability and our capability and our authenticity is what I heard today. When I coach my clients on building personal philosophy, it is really all that. It's understanding all of those bits that go together for me personally, a conscious intentionality of the values and beliefs so that it will serve them toward that beacon or that North Star. I cannot thank you enough for the contributions today and letting me pick on all of you. But I think we're getting close to the end of time. I want to just tap in quickly, make it short and sweet. And I'm going to start with our guests first. What do you want to leave people with? So Kathy, I'll start with you.
Listen to yourself. Feel what's going on around you. Make the right decisions, whether that goes for or against what your beliefs are. Do the next right thing. And then I just really want to say there's a quote that I absolutely love by Peter Drucker, which is, do not knowingly do harm.
Love that. Love that. Dee, do you have something you want to add?
The word that's been popping into my head is connection, and the way in which we've discovered even more now that that's so important to our hearts and to our beings, outside of work and in work. The more we can connect with each other at work and outside, and the more the person, the employee, connects with that larger thing, the more direct the connection is with their core being, the stronger we are and the more we have to give in terms of our what's the word, when you have a choice or not of giving, if it's directly connected, you give more. So connection, maybe that could be a word for 2021.
Greg, how about you?
Authenticity, starting with yourself. Know who you really are. Be willing to probe deep and ask yourself that include, how do I feel? What do I think? And do I have intuition about the situation? And then be willing to listen intently to other people because they have a different perspective. And because they're different doesn't make them wrong. It's an opportunity for you to learn.
I love that. That's a big piece of intellectual or emotional intelligence. Simone.
Wow, gosh, there was so much that was covered in that episode. That's a biggie. I think I'll come back to the chameleon. I want people to realize that it's okay to stay the color that you are at the moment. It's okay to be in the moment that you are, but also to find ways to reinvent yourself where you feel that is actually going to shift you into the right direction or into the journey of where you want to be and who you want to be.
I love that. Thank you. Roy, flipping it over to you, and then we can wrap up after that.
Amazing episode today, and some of the things that we were talking about. We were talking about how do you know when you're off, or what's your organization's center versus your center, and it made me think of the scene in Casablanca where Lieutenant Reynaud comes in and raids Rick's cafe, and he says, "Gambling? I'm shocked, and then takes his winnings and leaves. That's a great scene. It's how do we act in relation to things around us, and where are the lines that we create? Because guidelines that come from outside of us tend to not be as effective as those we set for ourselves. We'll leave it at that. Thanks to everybody today. Great episode. Enjoyed it. Thanks to Kathy Velblom, Dee Burgoyne, and these other people, whoever they are. Oh yeah, it's Patty and Greg and Simone. And we'll be back next week. Lord willing and the creek don't rise, as we say here in South Carolina. And bless your little heart for staying with us today. And we'll talk soon.
See y'all later.
On KTLO, keeping the learning
Keeping
on.
the learning on.